Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our fourth webinar in our series, The Hardware Marathon. We are looking at the phases and some of the obstacles encountered in developing a hardware product. If you missed our previous episodes, we've looked at how to utilize iterations to your advantage, the importance of using a physical representation to communicate your vision of the product, and on our last episode, we looked at several tools to protect your intellectual property, both domestically and on a global scale. You can find these on our YouTube channel if you weren't able to join us. In our webinar today, we're going to look at the importance of creating MVP. Let me introduce myself and our guest speaker today. My name is Jenney Loper. I'm the Director of Operations at Zebulon Solutions. I've been in manufacturing since the age of 6, working in my father's machine shop. After completing my degree in physics, I've held positions in every aspect of developing a product, from research to design to testing and scaling production to over 40,000 units a month. Most of my career has been working with a product after it has been designed, and I have over 2 decades of experience in manufacturing quality and supply chain management. In my current role, I have many conversations with people about developing their first product, which was really the development for creating this webinar series. I'm pleased to have Ed Albe join me today. I've had the pleasure of working with Ed several years ago at a telecom startup. Ed is an MBA educated marketing executive. Some of his recognitions include a 2013 finalist and a 2014 winner of the SPIE Award for Photonics Innovation. In 2022, as the CEO of 6D Laser, he received a Colorado OED Advanced Industries Award to develop an MVP based on an applied research grant from the DOE. Over his 4-decade career, Ed has provided transformational leadership in all aspects of business and operations. He's recognized as a marketing strategist and catalyst for continued aggressive and sustained growth for deep tech B2B companies, ranging from startups to global multinationals, as well as those requiring turnaround. Currently, he's a fractional chief commercial officer for Brightwave LLC. In this role, he's deploying comprehensive commercialization strategies that align with Brightwave's business strategy. He's also developing corporate-wide initiatives such as sales and distribution channel, inbound and outbound marketing, and customer service to advance Brightwave's differentiated value proposition in the marketplace. Ed, I'm so glad you're able to join me today to share your insights about minimally viable products, or MVPs, as they're commonly referred to.
Boy, it's so nice to be with you, Jenny. Good to see you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. I hope I can fulfill it.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, great.
We're going to be looking at 3 different topics that we've what is an MVP, what are some of the earmarks of a successful MVP, and how to identify what the best audience is for it. To our audience today, thank you for joining again. We would love for you to engage with us during the event. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to post them in the LinkedIn window. They will post up here in the webinar, and we'll try to address the questions throughout the session today. While we will take a brief pause between sections to answer questions, if something comes up as we're talking about it, please don't hesitate to go ahead and type that question into the window or the comment. We will be sure to capture that. So with that as an introduction, let's go ahead and get started and look at what some of the basics about MVPs are. Ed, would you be willing to give us a basic definition?
You know, the MVP was a term that was coined, interestingly enough, by a guy by the name of Frank Robinson years ago. Everybody knows Eric Ries and Steve Blank, but Robinson came up with the term. And in essence, it's the MVP is a result of product development and customer development executing in parallel, what he called synchronous development. So what you want to do is you want to produce a product that is, as you see here by the definition, bare bones enough where you can at least convey what your innovation is, what your intellectual property is, et cetera, but sufficient enough so that you can get, on this slide, it talks about early adopters. In essence, what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to get those visionaries, or what Steve Blank called early evangelists. You want to get people who really like being first at things. You want to get people that are willing to talk about this. So that's your target, your first target. And then what you also want to do hand in hand with that is try to find some what we call lead users. And lead users are, by definition, folks who are a little bit ahead of their time. They're able to see around corners, and see what's coming up and what their needs are going to be in the marketplace down the road. So that's one of the things that you have to look for, especially when you're targeting your MVP. It's not just necessarily early adopters. The visionaries are actually the first key market. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that background, and we've also talked about how we could spend an entire day or week talking about just MVPs. So I know we're going to go really quick over a lot of these little topics here.
Absolutely,
Um,
yeah.
what about what are some of the first steps in figuring out what an MVP is for your product?
Well, the first steps, hand in hand with this, and we're really not going to talk about it today, but for innovators, for founders, what you want to do is develop something that's called the business model canvas. So initially, back in the day before the dot-com winter, people used to go out to the marketplace with a business plan, right? And that was a conventional tool that people used. But a business plan, as Mike Tyson used to say, everybody has a plan until they get hit in the face. So the reality is, you spend all this time developing a business plan to go out to the market with something that you've developed over a couple of years with product engineering, product development, but it's just not. It's not a process that makes sense, especially for startups, right? So the only ones that are using, and then people used to put together 5-year business plans, and the only ones who really care about that are investors and maybe the old Soviet Union. So in essence, they require 5-year plans to forecast complete unknowns. The MVP process, as we know it today, starts out with, like I said, you have an innovation. You may have been in the particular marketplace for any number of years, and you see a gap, you see an opening, right? So you see that this problem is not being solved in the marketplace, and that's the impetus for you to begin your journey. And you want to then figure out, okay, who's my first target market for this? You start creating your buyer personas, or what we now call ideal customer profiles. And then you want to do some bare bones functional description of the minimum viable product. And you have to put in your core requirements for that, whether they're going to be regulatory, et cetera. And that process in a nutshell is how you first start out. But what became almost hackneyed was this notion of failing fast. The point is that you want to go from failure to failure in the MVP process, but it's more iterative, it's more agile. It's not that you're failing per se. You want to make some tweaks predicated on what you're hearing from the marketplace about what's resonating with your idea. So that's the process.
Yeah, I really appreciate your insight about how this process has evolved, how the process itself has evolved over time, from the 5-year plan as you were talking about to the modern MVP today. It looks like we're getting a little bit of comments around the last graphic, which I actually have to give a shout out to you for helping me come up with that. So thanks for that little graphic.
No problem.
So in some of the discussions that I have with entrepreneurs, many seem to be focused literally on just getting an MVP, because that seems to be the current view, but they don't seem to have the insight around what it really is. And so one of the misunderstandings that we see arises out of the focus on just getting an MVP and not understanding the tool. And it's just, they're grossly overlooking the necessity of doing thorough technical development and focusing on manufacturing readiness before it comes to the market for revenue. What are some of the misunderstandings that you see people are having?
Well, one of the major misunderstandings, and it's interesting, I was part of a company where the founder, when we first came together, he was very proud of the fact that he wanted to be able to create 3 MVPs. And I said, no, that's not happening. And here's why. We have a statement of work. We have a particular area that we feel is demonstrative of our innovation, which is, in that particular case, it was feedback and control mechanism using optical coherence tomography. So the point being that we want to introduce a product that is bare bones enough that it can embrace that particular thought or innovation and why it's important, and then go out to the marketplace and start pitching that and showing that. And ideally, if you can cobble together something with duct tape and what have you, that is fully functional, that you can at least demonstrate your differentiated value proposition, that's in essence what you want to do. Not any more complicated. Do overcomplicate this. It's like, oh, we're going to tweak this and we're going to do that. No, you have to really go out there, bare bones, and start eliciting comments and suggestions and see how you can meet a need that's obviously been underserved or unmet.
Yeah, that's a really good point about people. I think that we see that a lot too, where there's just the continual iterations and temptation to add features into it. I think we'll talk about that a bit more in a little bit here. But I want to go back to something you said a few minutes ago, and you were
Mhm.
talking about the early evangelists. That's a new term to me. I actually hadn't heard that until we started talking. Could you say a little bit more about what an early evangelist looks like and how you can identify them?
An early evangelist is a term that was coined by Steve Blank, right? And they have a problem. They're aware that they have a problem, but more importantly, they're willing to talk about it. And the other vernacular for this is key opinion leaders, right?
Mm.
So key opinion leaders are those where everybody turns to say, "Oh, wow, okay, what's this person thinking about?" And that's who we want to find. We want to find those people that are going to spread the word, because as we know in marketing, word of mouth is probably the best method of marketing. And people invariably will take recommendations from their friends versus anything else, colleagues in the industry, friends, whatever. They don't care that, on Amazon, you've got a 5-star review from some ambiguous person that you've never heard of. If somebody tells you, if a Dave Giltner or somebody like that we know, Jenny, if
Yeah,
he says, hey, Eddie, this thing is really hot stuff, we'll believe that, right?
absolutely.
And, what we also know is that even no matter how complex or esoteric a product is, people buy off of emotion. 70% of a sale has been shown or researched is that people buy off of emotion, irrespective of whether it's terahertz or Raman spectroscopy or some latest lidar or whatever. You still want to create that relationship. You want to get that relation. You want to get that word of mouth going, and those are the people you're really targeting. You want to satisfy one or a few people and see if if you can develop critical mass off of that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. Yes, Dave, I'm sure you would tell either one of us. I have no doubt about that. Um, but yeah, it's true that it's interesting how even in trying to find service industries and things like that, that people are just going off of, oh, I use so and so for X product or X service. There is this tendency to go off of word of mouth as opposed to actually looking at reviews and how people are actually functioning on across the board. Would you
Powerful.
mind, yeah, would you mind chatting a little bit about lead users as well and how they're different or
Sure.
similar
Sure.
to the early evangelists?
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, you'll see the formalized definition of this from a guy by the name of Eric von Hippel, who was out of Purdue. And in essence, they faced needs that will be general in the marketplace, but they faced them months in advance or even years in advance.
Mm.
In some respects, some of these things are called loon shots, if you will. They might have such a long fuse, but eventually over time they become commonplace. And they're also, these particular people who are considered lead users, they're positioned to benefit significantly by obtaining this solution. The thing about lead users is that they can be very helpful in designing your product, doing that whole iterative journey with you. So, it's important to find those. By the way, on the prior slide, I don't want you to go to it, but one of the other important things about early evangelists is that they have budget.
Yes,
That's
money, right?
Yeah,
They
I
all
mean,
need money. Yes.
that's a resonant theme throughout. Because there are a lot of folks out there who are pretty excited about what you're doing, but they just don't have anything.
Yeah.
And you can't build a business on that. That's part of that whole minimum viable audience, if you will, which
Mhm.
is in a next or further slide from that.
Yeah.
So that's the definition of lead users. Von Hippel goes into this very extensive description of this, which is very important. So what you want to find is these technologically aggressive folks that you can actually work with them to co-develop your product. Unfortunately, some of these lead users are going to want an exclusive or a sole partnership, but in some ways, that may not be a problem. In fact, very early on in my career, right before the MVP became even popular, I happened to be a co-founder of an enterprise software company back in 2001. Co-founding meaning that I found the angel investment for, and we cobbled together a solution, and I won't go through it on this call, but we cobbled something together that had a differentiated value proposition, and we pitched that to a company, and that company was so excited about it that they decided to buy the company very quickly.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was an instance where a lead user was like, "Holy moly! I don't want anybody else to see this. We'll buy you." So.
It's a great example. Congratulations on that.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I was able to buy a car.
Well, that okay. Well, all right. There's a car there.
Okay.
Well, as we wrap up this section, do we have any questions from our audience about what an MVP is, what its goals are, or who can identify any of the key features? I'm going to give this just a couple seconds to see if something comes over. Otherwise, we will jump into our exciting section. Let's see, is an MVP the same thing as a prototype, or are they related?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's kind of like, a prototype, depending on how you structure it, it could be an MVP. The problem that I see with prototypes is that it's too far down the road. It's too, you've done you've baked in some previous assumption into a product that may or may not be important to the marketplace. So a prototype may be done right. In fact, I think I have that on one of my slides, Jenny. I'm not sure, but
we may get there. Yeah.
Yeah, we may get there. But for me, an MVP is the child. Child is father to the man, if you will. So an MVP basically is a stripped down version of a prototype, if you will.
Gotcha.
In my mind,
it's that minimum. It's the minimum piece of it. So
yeah, exactly.
All right. Well, that's a good foundation. Let's go ahead and get into our next section and look at some of the earmarks of how to develop a successful MVP. I know you've developed many MVPs over your career. When are together, you wanted to share a few case studies to help us understand what works well for an MVP. So let's go ahead and get into that first case study. Would you tell us about? Yeah.
Go ahead, Jenny. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's all right. I was going to go ahead and tell us. So touch on what an MVP needs to do and what it doesn't need to do.
Yeah, this is, I get so excited about MVP and the whole lean startup methodology, et cetera. It was interesting. I was brought into a company in 2011 that had patented something in Raman spectroscopy called a high throughput virtual slit. And it was a whole different way of making a Raman spectrometer, right? I won't go into the details on that, but suffice it to say, when I came into the company, it was called RJ Enterprises. I came into the company and they showed me this box on the left side. The box is about the length and width is about the size of a piece of paper, actually. So it's kind of similar to what you see from what used to be called Ocean Optics. It's now Ocean Insight or Avantes or some of the other spectrometer companies out there. It's, they're small, they're inexpensive. Had a late question. Okay. Anyway, so they decided that they were going to incorporate their differentiated value proposition, which in essence was they could take photons in to the spectrometer and deliver significantly more photons to the detector, which is kind of unheard of in spectrometers. Invariably, in a spectrometer, you bring in light, you put a slit there, you throw away 95% of the bad light, and you hope to get the speciation of the particular chemical or whatever, from that other 5%. So in this case, they developed the ability to turn anywhere from 3 to 10 times more photons into the detector, which is a big deal, right? The problem is that the market they went after, which was represented by this MVP, or actually product in 2011, was that they were trying to attack Avantes and Ocean Optics and some of the other ones on this, where their product was good enough for what they were doing. And in the case of RJ, they wanted to charge 3 times more than what was out in the marketplace because they could deliver 3 to 10 times more photons. But it didn't matter. And I started learning that was inconsequential very early on in my career with RJ. And then we merged with another company and became Tornado Spectral. And by that time, I had seen that when we were testing this out in the marketplace, this MVP, I was getting a collective ho-hum. I was getting a collective yawn on this. So luckily, through my investigation into the marketplace, we did a lot of trade shows. Trade shows are a really good thing to find out what the marketplace wants. Probably the best thing in my mind. But through that and through forays into meeting with prospective customers through distributor networks we had set up worldwide, I learned that one of the most important things for Raman spectroscopy at the time was to be able to deploy it in an in-process QA QC environment. Couldn't do it before. That was one of, there's many methodologies for analyzing products in process. And unfortunately, Raman didn't have the speed to do it. So that's what gave rise, as you'll see on the other slides, it gave rise to a different type of spectrometer, which in essence was a $100,000 piece of gear, but it could do things in process that no one else could do. But we only learned about that, it was done iteratively over time and trying to figure out, okay, what's important to folks in the field. It's not just the number of photons per se, it's what you could do with that. And then we could also bring our Raman spectrometer into, it was part of the, what they call ATEX, which is the European directive of not being able to allow lasers over a certain power into environments. And our marketplace was reaction monitoring for pharmaceutical products. So you couldn't use a Raman spectrometer in a lot of their environments. It had to be lower than, I think it was less than 35 milliwatt laser power for Raman. And nobody else could get any information with that low of a power on a laser. So we were the only ones that could do that. So that opened up a whole new market for us. And that ultimately led to the company being, and the reason I could talk about this so freely right now is because the company was just recently purchased by Bruker. So it was an overnight success that only took about 12 years.
We can probably go to that next slide. Because I think that we were, thinking about the, they were going after a market and trying to carve off pieces of people that were already in the market, but they were just like, we already have what we need. We don't need to do anything new or insightful in that way. And I think having the insight, and I mean, I suppose, getting the ho-hum responses was probably a little bit demoralizing at the time, but you took that and you were able to turn that into, where do we need to go with this, and what part of the market do we need to pursue in order to find a product that is going to really connect with the audience that the product would be eventually good for.
Yeah, we had to overcome a lot of market headwinds and resistance from the behemoths out there, the Renishaws, the PerkinElmers, whatever, that didn't have a vested interest in seeing us successful, right? Because it was, going after their marketplace, Thermo, whatever. But so we counteracted that, or at least I counteracted that by doing a tremendous amount of content. I was, despite my age, I'm a pretty prolific user of social media, particularly LinkedIn, so that you can create the kind of content that builds up that, as I mentioned to you, Jenney, earlier, to build up the familiarity effect for what we were doing, and then also to try to overcome what we call status quo bias, which is natural. We all want to do what we're used to doing. And gradually over time, we gained, close to 2,000 followers on LinkedIn, and we were getting tremendous amount of impressions. And then over time, it just gradually got to the point where it was like, Mettler Toledo and Metrum and some of the other folks out there came knocking on the door to say, hey, listen, we have to have this product as part of our roster. And so that was a pretty good success story. Pretty happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's go ahead and talk about the next case study that you sent along.
Sure.
Would you mind giving us some lessons that you had learned in that product that were different than what you had from the first example?
Yeah, these are the products that Tornado Spectral currently has in their roster. So these were developed off of those earlier, on the earlier slide, so you could see how the progression went. We went from coming out with a bare bones, very early battleship grade product that we sold for $100,000 to Pfizer and BMS and a few others. I mean, it was ugly, with a big, what does Walgreens do, that red nose thing every year where you have
Oh,
the big thing? So, it had the big laser shut off on the front. You can see on the previous slide. But they bought it because it was really a very powerful tool to use in process. And then over time, to Tornado's credit, they started developing what I consider to be a beautiful mix of products that were as attractive as they were effective. And this is what it turned into. And this is what led to the acquisition by Bruker.
gotcha. I think that's actually a really important point, is going back and going back to the whole minimum viable product is, they had a product that get out into the market. And then once they were in the market and being able to be successful, then they could come in and add additional features and do some refinement and things like that. And
Yes.
I think that so many entrepreneurs really get focused on what else can get added in and making things overcomplicated. How do you help encourage the teams that you work with to avoid overcomplicating and scope growth in an MVP?
Well, what you have to do is this then all becomes part of your business model canvas, and there's some realities when you're going to the marketplace. You have to understand what is the price sensitivity of the market you're going after. Okay, so then that puts a ceiling on what you can charge, right? So if you want to start baking in all these accoutrements, all these things, all these features, whatever, maybe the marketplace can't withstand that kind of price. So you have to have a real good understanding of, number one, the price tolerance in the market. No one's going to want a $250,000 replacement for a gas chromatography unit that costs 50 grand, even if it has more bells and and whistles and features or whatever. So you have to be very sensitive to that. And then you have to look at your cost structure, right, to see if you can make any money at this thing, right? So what it requires, you have to be not only good at marketing, but you have to be really good at understanding the whole, purpose of the business, and how you can stay in business and build out that pro forma to say, okay, fine, if I do sell this amount of units over time and we think it can sell for this, what is it going to cost me? Maybe, that $100,000 system is going to cost me 80 grand. Well, I can't afford to do that. So, that puts the brakes on further development, or maybe it encourages further development.
It takes some wisdom to know which way to go on that, I'm sure.
Yeah, you just called me old there.
Wisdom, that doesn't mean necessarily old.
There you go.
Yeah. Discernment. How about that? We'll go with discernment.
That's okay. I'm good with either one.
All right. I appreciate you giving some insight about on these from these case studies of things that you've learned. I was wondering if as we kind of wrap up this section, if there's any other questions that we would like to address from the audience. And while people are typing that question in, we can address Dave's from the last one, because there's a little delay here about looking at a prototype and an MVP as verifying market fit. I tend to agree with that, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree too. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're looking for product market fit, because that's in essence, whether it's either 35% or 40% of the reason B2B startups fail, it's a huge number. And the reality is that, and once again, depending on who you talk to, Steve Blank says 75%, others have said 70 to 90% of high technology B2B startups fail over 5 years. So
right. Yeah.
The objective with MVP is just go ahead and get a few things the marketplace is desperately in need of, and just cobble something together. And
it's got to work, though, because the market won't be happy if you put it out there and it doesn't work.
Exactly. Some stakeholders who want handheld devices.
I'll read the question.
Interestingly enough, we had this at Tornado.
Did you?
Yeah, we had this at Tornado. In fact, Digilabs wanted a handheld. In fact, Metrum over time, they wanted a handheld, which didn't make sense for the high throughput virtual split that we cobbled together. So Metron went with that
Mm.
Snowy Range, I think, in Wyoming, and their handheld called Nera or Vera or something like that was actually they bought Snowy Range up in Laramie, I believe,
Mm.
and people in the marketplace did indeed want a handheld, high throughput virtual slit, and frankly, you can't do it in that small of a space.
Mm. It's a challenge. So yeah, figuring out how to. I mean, in the market may want things that are impossible. I mean, I would love a time machine, but I don't think that I'm going to get one of
Yeah.
those. So I mean,
Well, Digilabs at the time was waving a 50-piece order in front of us.
oh,
Just,
it's so tempting. But you can't break the laws of physics, right? I mean, it doesn't matter.
no, no,
Yeah.
you can't. In fact, we also had people that wanted to use this patented innovation as almost like a drop-in for their current spectrometer designs, whether it be NIR, Raman, whatever, almost as if they were going to treat it like a carburetor, and you couldn't do that either. So there was many times where we had to basically tell the marketplace no, because as much as you want to be opportunistic, you got to be pragmatic about this.
Yes.
And like I said, very early on, it looked to me that the opening in the market, the unmet need in the marketplace, was process. Something to verify in real time that Raman could be utilized for that. And I kind of stood my ground on that. So luckily, so, you froze up there. I think we froze up. Can you see me? Jenney, I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me? I don't know if you guys are seeing me. Apologies. I can't hear anybody.
Hey, Edward, Mark,
Mark?
behind the scenes, just want to let everyone know it looks like Jenny's having some technical difficulties, and we
Ah,
actually have a storm coming through the area. So,
okay.
um,
I thought it might have been me. Thanks for telling me, because I was
yeah,
like, whoa, okay.
absolutely. Would you mind just continuing on, and I can show the slides? Would that
Sure,
be okay?
sure, no problem.
We can talk about the
Look,
audience, minimal viable audience.
yeah, no, I mean, knowing your audience, I mean, that's part of the whole market validation and customer discovery process in the lean startup methodology. So you're going to go out into the marketplace and interrogate them and ideally see what they're doing. There's a thing out there called jobs to be done theory, where you're actually watching what people do to kind of get a better sense of how your particular innovation can fit into what they're doing, and see if it could make their life a little easier. So knowing your audience just means interacting as much as possible. I'm real big. It's old school, but I'm real big on face-to-face discussions, because the most important thing in communication is hearing what's not being said, and you can really pick up nuance and see that effectively in a face-to-face conversation. I'm also big on getting a lot of this information, like I said, at conferences or trade shows, and there's nothing better than being able to understand the needs of your marketplace, and also having familiarity with what their issues are, and then baking that knowledge of your audience into your iterative tweaks into your MVP. Does that help your question, Mark?
Absolutely, yep. And then moving on to the next slide.
Yeah, this is the reality. This is kind of where the rubber meets the road. In other words, you can have a particular innovation that's extremely wonderful, but maybe you don't have a market that's big enough to support your business. So that's where, and this is a term This is a term developed by Seth Godin, who's a very famous marketer, and he talks about trying to create, and this goes back to these early evangelists, trying to create an audience for your product. You want to please the smallest possible portion of that audience. You want to really please them. You want to really get them excited, so they'll go ahead and express their excitement, to others in that same word of mouth fashion. But, truth be told, if you only have 3 prospective users for your product in the whole world, well, guess what? You don't have a business. You might have a really cool thing, but you don't have a business.
Absolutely. And I know Jenny was asking about, in the context of developing an MVP, if you had any suggestions for which activities are best to do themselves versus using a third party.
Yeah, I'm really big on the whole notion of comparative advantage, right? So the reality is, in the space that I've dabbled in for years, which is these complex, often esoteric type products, not, they're hardware, they're not software for the most part. The most important thing for startup founders is to concentrate on the areas of expertise where they have a distinct advantage. Most often in early stage startups, they don't have the product development team, they don't have the engineering team, they don't have the ability to leverage the supply chain. So for me, I'm always looking for a place like a Zebulon or others who can go ahead. I can outsource that as quickly and easily as possible, especially in light of the fact that a Zebulon is going to have a certain critical mass of engineering and product development right there at the ready. That's, I don't have to add that overhead, right? They also have full knowledge about any of the trap doors, the gotchas in the market for me introducing my product, whether it be regulatory or things I just don't know about. So for me as a startup, I have this innovation. I want to focus on that. And then ideally, I also want to focus on the marketing of that. That's, because marketing and innovation are the only 2 things that distinguish you as a startup. All the rest are costs. So I try to outsource that as quickly as possible. I think it's the lowest cost and the quickest approach to things.
Gotcha. Wonderful. At this time, I think we're going to actually transition into Q&A, and appreciate all the insights. If anyone does have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them right into the comments here. Oh, it looks like we've got Jenny back, so I will jump out.
You got tired of listening to me, huh, Jenny?
That was really a very interesting thing. Like literally my whole life just went blank and I'm like, what in the world? So
yeah, we saw that. Yeah.
I'm sorry
Welcome
about
back.
that. Yeah, thank you. Where are we at?
Well, we're at the Q&A session. We've talked about minimum viable audience. We've also talked about where I see it's a comparative advantage for early stage startups to outsource the product development, if you will, to like a Zebulon, purely because of all the capabilities that you have. And I look at it as the lowest cost approach to doing this. And you don't want that overhead, purely because you want to, as we talk about, you want to go from failure to failure or fail fast. You want to make iterative tweaks. Hopefully you're not doing a full-blown pivot. And if you do a pivot, a pivot is okay, fool you once, if you go more than one pivot, it's fool me twice. It's like, you don't want to be doing that. So
right.
How can you rein in your sales marketing? That's a fascinating question. MVPs can be used in big companies. It's not easy, by the way. So the point is, invariably at the beginning, an early stage startup, unless they've been blessed with big investment, they really don't have a sales and marketing team per se, because in essence you're selling the T-shirt at the beginning. You have this wonderful idea, this innovation that you want to go ahead and interrogate the marketplace with. And then at that point, when after you've developed the product, then you want to bake in what you've heard in the marketplace to that product, and then you want to unleash the hounds. Let sales and marketing really get after it. But it's almost difficult to rein in sales and marketing people, because guess what? That's their job. They want to go out there and evangelize to find those early evangelists, right? So that's a good problem to have. It's just that it requires a certain amount of pragmatism to say, hey, listen, we've got this idea, we've got this innovation, we've seen what you do, you could really probably use it. What you want to do is you want to prime the pump, but you don't want to oversell. You still want to collect information.
As a marketing person, I really appreciate you kind of calling out yourself and your cohorts about having to rein your own self in.
Yes.
I assume that's been something you've had to learn over the course of your career to pull yourself back. I mean, all the way back to where you are. So you're an evangelist for the MVP process itself, because you've seen so much value in it.
Yeah. No, in fact, it's really interesting. I'll tell this story. It's a sidebar, but when I introduced the minimally viable product and the minimally viable lean startup methodology into the company I mentioned in 2011, the founder of the company who who came up with the innovation and patented, when I called what we were trying to do a minimally viable product, he did not love it. I mean, he thought that was so pejorative. He thought that was like, wow, how dare you call my firstborn, minimally viable? And I had to go through literally almost a year of trying to say, no, this is a compliment. If you want, I'll call it an MAP, a minimally awesome product, whatever you like. It's fine. But you do have to rein it in a little. And that's what I've learned over time. And I've also learned over time, and this is a good training for going back to the sales question, focus is absolutely monumental. Reining in is also not about quantity, it's about quality. So I'm a big fan, as you probably know, Jenney, of account-based marketing, which is very, very, it's a lot harder than people think it is. You got to do a lot of research, spend an awful lot of time. And then as far as your sales department is concerned, I'm really big advocate of Miller Hyman and challenger sales, which also takes a tremendous amount of time, investigation, research. In fact, in challenger, it's understanding the marketplace better than your prospective customer, so that you can go back to them with a solution without sounding just like an empty barrel.
A lot of work on the back end to make that happen, I'm very sure.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Well, I appreciate the conversation we've had today, and I certainly appreciate you kind of filling in when my world went blank. I would like to leave our audience with some insights, and I know we're over time here. So, Ed, I'll just ask you, what is the most important thing you want people to walk away from this conversation today?
This is a little simplistic, but I would go into the whole lean startup methodology fully armed in understanding that you don't want to overcomplicate that MVP out of the gate. You really want to share your innovation with a partner, and that's, by the way, partners. That's one of the 9 attributes of the business model canvas. You want to align yourself with someone like a Zebulon very early to say, hey, listen, this is my idea, this is my innovation, but I want to put it into a package where someone can really mess with it, figure it out, and give me the kind of input, to go ahead and make those iterative tweaks to make it a saleable product, or to shut it down as quickly as possible. So it's all for me about being really quick, fail fast, although I've almost become to hate that, but fail fast is probably the right terminology for it.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Well, there's a lot. Yeah. Let's go ahead. Sorry.
No, anything else, Jenney?
No, I was just going to wrap up. I was going to say that that's one thing that we also I counsel people who are thinking about designing a new product is, helping them really think through how invested they are and how much of their how much money they either want to put into the product or how much of money they want to try and raise.
Right.
And if they're not interested in throwing in, many, many, many zeros worth of money or going out and raising that equivalent of money, it's fun to have ideas, and sometimes you just need to enjoy the idea and not move forward. And I think that you're saying the same thing about go out and find out if this is going to work as early as possible,
Yeah.
because you don't want to be wasting
Yeah.
money
Yeah.
on things, on business ventures that are just not going to pan out.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we got to also be careful of a lot of founders. They become very proud over what they've innovated, and
Right.
you need to have a commercial person involved with you early. And I've written about that. Bringing in a commercial partner very quickly, who can really give you a reality check and tell you that the emperor has no clothes. People fall in love with their ideas, and sometimes, guess what? You got to go out in the backyard and shoot it. It is what it is.
You are right. Sometimes you do need to realize that you are too in love with something that you hold dearly and let it go.
Which is hard. It's, by the way, that's a hard thing for me to have to bring to people. And it's not, as they say in The Godfather, it's not personal. It's just business.
Right. Absolutely. We do a fair amount of that at Zebulon Solutions, telling people things that they don't want to hear, but frankly, it's for their own good. Anyway, Ed, I thank you so much for joining me today as we've talked through developing an MVP in our Hardware Marathons webinar series. For those who are following along, we're halfway through the series at this point. Our next webinar, we're going to start looking at the first steps towards manufacturing with the alpha phase. Our starting point will be where we are today, coming out with a very strong, robust prototype of the MVP. Although Chuck will tell you that a robust prototype is an oxymoron. Go read the blog about that if you want to see what it's about. But anyway, I hope you'll all be able to join us next time. In parallel, as I've mentioned, we are doing a blog series as well. The blog associated with this particular topic is out on our website already. That's at zebulonsolutions.com. We will put this video up on YouTube in case you weren't able to see the whole thing or want to go back and hear something that we were talking about. And if you'd like to get in contact with myself or Ed, feel free to do so at the contact page at the Zebulon website, or you can shoot us an email at info@zebulonsolutions.com. Just mark in there that you'd like to get in contact with Ed, and I'll be very happy to make that introduction. Thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next time.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
Take care.
Take care.